It is a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. And my name is Carlos Hidalgo, and I am the guy who is going to tell you all about work-life balance. But here's the easiest poll you're ever going to take. Raise your hand if you've heard of work-life balance.
That is unbelievable.
Okay. Now raise your hand if you've heard of work-life blend. It's not as popular as work-life balance, but it's this idea that I'm not going to give 100% of myself to my work life or to my personal life. Instead, I'm going to kind of mesh it all together. And while neither one of these are altogether foreign, today I want to talk to you about work-life boundaries. Now, as Monica said, I know that you may be sitting there, and I would probably be asking the same thing, saying, what is a man going to tell 400 plus women, and a smattering of men, thank you for being here for support, about work-life balance, blend, or certainly boundaries? And I can tell you I do really appreciate that. And in order to address that, I first want to talk about two perceptions that we have adopted in our culture as truth that I believe are just flat wrong. So the first is that of a career woman. It is widely accepted that after work is done, it is the woman's primary role to keep things running at home. It is she who must make sure the meals are served, the kids get shuttled to practice, get their homework done, get fed, put to bed on time, etc. The second false perception is that of us, men. There is this accepted idea that we are not as connected in our homes, that we are not as emotive, that somehow we are more devoted to our professions and to our jobs. Therefore, we work longer hours, and as a result, when the day is done, honey, we just have nothing left to give. And therefore, it is expected that we are not doing our fair share in our homes. So please understand this. This is not me, a man, telling you women to adopt my boundaries. What it is me doing is inviting you to take a look at how to incorporate boundaries into your life, and in so doing, create more opportunities to show up. Now, I do hate to say it, but most of my career could be defined as living a life way off balance and certainly void of any semblance of boundaries. I was that guy who ascribed to that false idea of what a working dad and husband should be. You could even say I was committed to this way of life, so much so that in 2014, I wrote this post on LinkedIn. Thank you for laughing. I thought I was going to get boos and hisses. In this post, I write, I am completely unbalanced, and I am okay with that. So let me back up. In early 2002, I landed a job with a global brand name software company. I was fortunate enough to find early success, and over the course of the next few years, I had a series of promotions which led to more work, more responsibility, and frequent global travel. As a result of that, I was missing out on so many precious moments in my home. Missing out on my kids' games, missing out on their concerts, and actually missing out on the things that are more relational, like family dinners and just wrestling with your boys in the den after dinner. However, I was okay with that because I justified it by telling myself, I am doing this all for my family. The reality is my family did not care about my titles, my promotions. They didn't even care about the raises. They simply wanted a husband and a father who was going to be home, present, and available. Towards the end of my run with the software company, I had a trip to Austin, Texas. We lived in Dallas at the time, so for me it was a pretty short trip. It was one night, less than 45 minutes of flight time. I got settled in my hotel, I called home, and this little guy answered the phone. Right? He looks like his mother. And so that is my youngest son, Luke, who was 3 at the time. And when he heard my voice, he said, Daddy, he said, are you in an airplane? I said, no, bud. I'm in a hotel with a slight laugh. And he said, Daddy, you're always in hotels. And he hung up the phone. You can tell now, I was crushed. Still am. It's been 14 years since that day. I'm still crushed by that moment. But I knew that night that something had to give. Something had to change. Suzanne called back, my wife, and she apologized, but she was not the one that needed to apologize. I was. So I told her I can't do this anymore. I just can't do it. And that night, she agreed. Shortly thereafter, I left the software company, and I co-founded my first business. It was a huge risk, and I was very scared. I had never done business ownership before. I had no idea what the future would hold, but I knew it would keep me home with those that I loved so dearly. My family was also on board. Suzanne and I knew this was going to be a huge step backwards financially, but we agreed that together, that having more time as a family was so worth it. The first few years of business went as any small business does. It was full of ups and downs, and then things started to take off. We started getting bigger clients. We started hiring employees. My workload was increasing, we were getting bigger, and my travel started up yet again. Not only was the business thriving, but this time I was fortunate enough, or unfortunate enough, to have being established a personal brand in my industry. I was being asked to speak, I was being asked to write, I was contributing to industry publications. I had signed a contract to write my first book. I was repeating the very cycle that just a couple of years earlier I had vowed to break. But this time was worse. If I'm really honest, seeing as we're all among friends, what drove me more than anything was my ego. You will have to determine what is driving you to tolerate a life of imbalance. For me, it was ego. I loved being known in our industry. I loved being asked to come speak at industry events. I loved watching the growth of our business, and wow, did I love seeing my name on a book cover. And I was okay with all of it, and was completely okay with being unbalanced, as after all, from all appearances, I was successful. If I am really, really honest, what has happened there, as I'm so successful, I started to ask myself the question, if I am so successful, why am I so miserable? Because the more success we had, the more the business grew, the more success that I experienced, the less fulfilled and more narcissistic I became. But why? It's because what was missing in my life at the time was meaningful relationship and connection, which is what we as human beings are fundamentally wired for. That's where we are. And I was moving so fast, and I was so determined to grow my business and my career, I put my relationships on the back burner. At the end of 2015, I literally came to a crossroads. I could continue to invest in my career and the facade of business success, and in the process lose my marriage and my family, or I could invest in my marriage and the life with my children, which are the things that bring me true joy. I'm a slow learner. If you ask anybody close to me, they will all nod their heads. It took me twice around to learn. I did not immediately establish my work-life boundaries. It was and it continues to be a process. But it did start with a few conscious choices. The first one was the business. After 10 months of wrestling, at the end of 2016, I called my business partners, told them that I was leaving the company that I had helped start more than a decade before. I had no backup plan. I had no life savings to fall back into. I had no big buyout, and there was no job waiting. I had one friend tell me, this is simply you pulling the ripcord, and he was right. It was a huge risk, and it was scary, but I was so assured it was the right decision to make. Secondly, I had to slow down. The pace that I had been moving and the frenetic speed at which I had been driving my career prevented me from hearing those around me who loved me so much, who were trying to tell me things that I simply just couldn't see. Once I took the time to slow down, I was able to take a few steps back. And I was able to determine what the next chapter would look like and what a life together with my wife, along with our children, would look like. This time it was not me making all the decisions in isolation. It was me taking the time to listen and do this holistically with those around me, as after all, I was far from the only one who was impacted by my choices. And then lastly, I had to do something that I'm really bad at. I had to apologize. I had to not only apologize, but to my closest of relationships, but I went back to LinkedIn. And you women are laughing at me as a man, I know it. This is not something we are good at. In this post, I was wrong. I quote Brene Brown, who says, if we want to live a wholehearted life, we have to be intentional about cultivating sleep and play, and about letting go of exhaustion as a status symbol and productivity as self-worth. I was so far from living a wholehearted life. I was not cultivating those things that bring health and happiness. And I did use my exhaustion and productivity as self-worth and validation, and in the process was completely oblivious to the slow erosion of my closest of relationships. It has been 2 years since I started this boundary-guided journey, and I am thrilled to tell you things are going pretty well. Things are very different. First and foremost, after much discussion, my wife and I decided that I should start another business. However, this time she is my only business partner, and she is here today. Secondly, we decided to be a purpose-driven company. We demonstrate this where we give 5% of our net profit to an organization that is focused on the long-term education, empowerment, and sustainability of single moms and widows in Uganda. We have also defined our boundaries. If you're going to start another business, you don't want to go 3 times around. We defined our boundaries. And what we did is we defined the values that we want to protect. And so these are what work for us, and you will have to determine what works for you. And these would have been different for us when our children were much younger. You will have to determine what works for you, whether you are single, have children, no children, are married, or have a significant other, or in any other kind of relationship that you value. For us, the first one, meaningful time for relationships. We have a boundary that on most mornings we start with a cup of coffee sitting at our kitchen table for 20 minutes. We want to protect that boundary. Time for physical and mental physical rejuvenation. For me, I had to go radical and say, I'm no longer going to work on the weekends. For you, you may say, I am no longer going to work Saturday morning because that is going to be family time. The key is to do your relationships in community with your closest of relationships. I can tell you this, the beauty of living within boundaries are the clear lines that it draws. When I am working, I am working. I am there, I am focused, I am productive, and I am not distracted by anything in the outside. When I am involved in my relationships outside of work and my hobbies and those things that bring me joy, I am wholly there, I am focused, and I am not distracted by anything work-related, even as simple as having coffee, because here's the big idea. Your boundaries don't need to be grand, they just need to be established. The results have been remarkable. I have a renewed sense of exploration, both professionally and personally. My thinking is clearer, my creativity is off the charts, my physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health are better than they've ever been before, as are my relationships. I can tell you this, the difference has been clear to all that have been involved. And I implore you today to go home tonight and just simply begin to write down what you value and then what boundary you may need to incorporate to protect that value, and then discuss it with a loved one. To tell you how apparent that change is when my daughter Lauren was leaving for college, and I'm not going to cry because I don't have a picture of her. She said to me, Dad, I love the guy you are now. I just wish he hadn't taken so long to show up. Thank you.